Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Downtown Denver Partnerships webinar on how to prepare your space for outdoor dining this winter. My name is Emily Tucker. I'm a Senior Manager of Economic Development at the Downtown Denver Partnership. And for anyone who's not familiar with our organization, the Downtown Denver Partnership is a place-based economic development organization comprised of over 700 member companies. We focus on everything from business and retail recruitment strategy to creating housing solutions, improving the public realm, supporting entrepreneurship and innovation, and much, much more. If you want to learn more about how to get involved, please visit our member and resource pages at downtowndenver.com. We know that restaurants are the heart and soul of our center city experience, and today's program is focused on giving restaurateurs the tools they need to be as successful as possible this winter. Today's program will begin with an overview from 4 different city and county of Denver agencies to make sure you know how to permit a temporary outdoor patio, as well as any of the heating or tenting or other elements you add to your space. After some Q&A with those city representatives, we'll leave you with some design inspiration. We have Mike Griffith from Stantec Urban Places, who will give you some tips on how to design your space to maximize customer enjoyment. He will also provide some COVID outdoor resources. So speaking of resources, I do want to mention that you may have seen that the City and County of Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure recently announced a grant program for temporary outdoor spaces. While we won't be covering that grant program in detail today, we do encourage you all to visit the program website to look into your eligibility. We'll include a link to that as well as some contact emails for any questions you have. We'll include that in the chat as well as a few other resources. With that, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions of today's guests, as we'll have time at the end of each of the presentations to address those. With that, I want to jump in, leave plenty of time for our speakers. So I'd like to start by introducing Ashley Kilroy, the Executive Director of Excise and Licenses for the City and County of Denver, who will kick things off on behalf of the city. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks to the Downtown Denver Partnership for putting this together. We're here with a bunch of different city agencies to talk to you about our temporary outdoor expansion patio program and about the rules for the winter. And I mean, I think this presentation, Emily, great timing. This information is now more important than ever, since I know you're all aware, I think it was on Tuesday, the governor moved a couple of counties, 10 of our Colorado counties, up into higher level of restrictions. Denver was one of those. Both Denver and Adams County moved into the third phase of safer at home. We're right below stay at home. And so that puts in more restrictions for restaurants, which would make this program really a lot more important for all of us. Next slide, please. And how about the next slide, please? So program highlights. We have about, right now, when we did it in the summer, for the summer expansion program, right now we have about 344 active outdoor patios, and that's been coordinated across 6 different agencies. So you're gonna hear from each of those agencies. What we have, from the beginning when we first started doing this, Downtown Denver Partnership was one of the first partners to reach out to us on this and really ask us to do this. They started doing some research, they brainstormed with us, they helped us, develop this program. And, our main reason when we did it was to help provide economic relief to you guys, to the restaurants, make sure that our citizens were safe for dining outside, and make sure that, we were looking at creative ways to enhance the public realm. Now that we've finished the program, we realized, in addition to all that, it also really benefited the city and our tax revenue. We've done a calculation working with the Department of Finance and Treasury and looked at, we know, yes, restaurants have lost a lot of money over these summer months. So a lot of that revenue shrunk, but with the outdoor expanded capacity, we actually, what budget is saying is preserved, and I think it was about $287 million in estimated sales for restaurants. So that's a lot of money that I hope really helped you guys. We've also heard from some restaurants that this was one of their best summers ever. I know that's not for everybody, but it really does show the importance of this program, and that if we can work together and make it work, it's really helpful for all of us. We also, those sales resulted in about 24 million, I think it was $24 million in tax revenue to the city. So we can continue to deliver services to you and provide, our public health services and our economic development services and everything that's helping us today as we move through this pandemic. And the program has now been extended to October 2021, and we're moving into the winter part of the program. So one of the things that I know Emily mentioned it about the Department of Transportation grants, we do there, if you go to our website, if you look up Denver Temporary Outdoor Patio Expansion Program, we've also got a couple of other grants. We've got links to those grants, so we'll get a link to the DOTI grants, the Department of Transportation grants in there as well. But on our website, Eric Caraga from the Office of the Department of Economic Development and Opportunity, DEDO, they just announced some CARES Act dollar grants. And we also have a link to some grants that are being provided by DoorDash for restaurants like you who are looking to expand your outdoor patios because of the pandemic. Next slide, please. So now just some of the real basics before I kick it over to everyone else. The issue that you all need to think about is what's indoors and what's outdoors and what's going to be best for your business. So the state developed the rules related to what's going to constitute indoors and what's going to constitute outdoors based on public health information, based on where we would see a lower risk of transmission of the virus. Indoors, higher risk of transmission, outdoors, lower risk of transmission of the virus. So if you're adding a tent or you're adding something outdoors for outdoor seating, depending on how far you go and how warm you want to keep it, it could ultimately be considered indoors. So you don't get the benefits of different public health order rules if you're considered outdoors. As we know, just recently, the governor said indoor capacity now is no longer at 50%, it has to go down to 25%. Still, you can have up to 50 people. So it's 50 people or 25% capacity, whichever is less, I think. Hey, Dominic, while I'm talking, would you mind looking that up real quickly? Or if it's still at that 50. So it's 25% or 50 people. And so that's pretty restrictive. So if you do if you do a tent that has 4 walls with a ceiling, as you can see right there, that would be considered indoors. If you do a tent with 3 walls closed and 1 side open and a ceiling, that's going to be considered indoors as well. And then they looked at the tricky question of two walls. And what they said is if you have 2 walls that are parallel and a ceiling, that would be outdoors because the wind could continue to move through. But 2 adjacent walls would not be considered outdoors anymore, that's indoors. So then outdoors, that's the description on the other side, right? To 9 non-adjacent sides open enough to prevent airflow. Outdoors is also 2 adjacent walls closed, as long as you don't have a roof, as long as you don't have a ceiling on that tent. And then anything else that doesn't have a ceiling, like if you have a canopy or if you have umbrellas or different tables, anything else without walls is your outdoors. So that's also all on our website. It's on the state website as well. Next slide, please. I had something else I was going to say. I know what I was going to say. So if you are totally on private property, if you're on your own property and you're not going to do significant additions or rebuildings, you probably don't have to do anything. All you probably have to do to continue into the winter is to just repost. We have the posting because anybody that has a liquor license has to advise their neighbors that they're doing something different, make sure the neighbors are okay with that. So if you're just on private property, you're not going to build anything, and you just want to roll on into the winter, very likely you don't have much to do. You just have to repost, and we can talk to you a little bit more in detail about that. But if you're going to do more, and particularly if you're going to move, continue to be in the right of way, or if you're going to build some more significant structures, you will need to come back through the city processes to have another review. So next up is Nicole Edwards from the Department of Transportation. Nicole has been key and such an unbelievable partner in helping get you guys through this. She oversees plan review in the Department of Transportation. And remember, what she's got away when she's looking at your request to move in the right of way or keep the right of way open, she still has to consider all of the other issues around accessibility of our city and the ability of our community members to get from place A to B and ADA requirements. And so she and her team really have a lot to consider when they're looking at these requests to expand or remain in the right of way. So I'll turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you, Ashley. That was a great introduction. Greatly appreciate it. I'm having some issues here. Sorry, was trying to start the video. Okay, well, I'll go ahead with the presentation. There we go. Awesome. Okay, so thanks, Ashley, for that information. Again, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nicole Edwards, and I'm with Permit Operations with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. Speaking to you today about the outdoor temporary expansion excuse me, permits. So Ashley shared the good news. Absolutely. The program's been extended through October 31st, 2021. And for those of you that have not participated in the program, I want to give you a website right away where you'd have the opportunity to go gain information, insight on what we've learned from this practice and be able to participate. So you would go to www.denvergov.org/outdoor expansion. And that's for anyone that has not participated in the program. For those of you that have participated and you've been successful, you're eligible to apply for an extension. And for that extension, you would send an email to Dottie permitoperations@denvergov.org. And the portion of that will take place is we're going to do another plan review, which is required. The program's been extended through October 31st of 2020. However, for permit operations for Dottie, we need to basically renew those in a 90-day interval. And that's just to ensure the safety and that there is no conflict with any of the space that's required, whether that be for the sidewalk, whether that is for the tree line and or a parking lane. We would conduct that technical review, as well as we need to collect an updated certificate of insurance with dates that would align with January 31st of 2021. We also want to make sure that we continue to ensure the safety for all of the community. So we need to take into consideration right now the weather, existing construction, planned construction, events, excuse me, emergencies, etc. We will also make sure that if your site plans, currently people have tables, chairs, railings, things of that nature. If going into these winter months, you're adding decks, you may be looking at some type of a pergola, heaters, things of that nature. Excuse me, I'd ask that you advance the slide, please. Here's some examples for you, a little more visual. If you're adding heaters, structures, things of that nature, we need to look at that site plan. We'd have to recommend to you that definitely for the heating elements, you'd need to pull a permit with the Denver Fire Department. And if there are structures, then we would need for you to basically have a review by our building department. I can assure you that our agencies are working extremely collaboratively together. We're on your side in this. We're learning as we go, but we're working in a very strong collaboration so that we can expedite the review and the issuance of the permits as quick as possible. So please don't be deterred or, pushed back by the multiple agencies. We've been working together on this project and it's been working successfully. So just make note, if you currently have a permit and you're looking to expand for another quarter, then what you would need to do, if it's that heat, I just have to drill it again. If you've added heaters or any type of structures, we want to make sure we get you the correct reviews. We want to encourage that you realize you need to leave the sidewalk with about 5 feet wide. And that's just making sure that there is continuous flow. And then we need to encourage that you not do any blockage to the curb or to the inlets to make sure that any type of sewage and things of that nature have the ability to be taken care of. Another big piece we need to look at here in Denver is addressing the snow issue. So if you currently have a permit, most of you already know that you're responsible for ensuring that the snow removal is taken care of immediately after snowfall. But we also want to be in collaboration and partnership with you and encourage you to have the consideration for the snow plows themselves. And as they're providing the maintenance for the whole entire city, take into mind the size of the plows and that you're looking at machinery versus people. And so therefore, when they're removing the snow, there can be that debris that makes it to the sidewalk and or the parking lane. And so we encourage you, so you don't incur any damage during this time, we encourage you to remove all of those added tables, chairs, or any instruments that you have in your install so that they're not damaged during this time, and then put them back out after the snow removal. So I really encourage you to be aware of that and to keep mind of it. And I'd also like to let you know that if you're looking to expand into an area where your partner business, an adjacent business, if they've decided this go around not to participate, or they were never participating before and you're interested in the space, with this process, you'd also require a letter of support that we would need to see that the adjacent business has been in agreement with you that you could utilize their space for your expansion. So just a reminder, we wanted to make sure that you're also knowing in the right of way that you're not securing or attaching any installs to the asphalt. That would be a different type of a permit and a different type of reviews in its totality. So again, this program currently is in temporary of nature, and so therefore you would not install anything that would be left there permanently. And then again, the hugest reminder is snow maintenance coming through this session, and we just want to encourage you again to remove your items when needed. And lastly, another bit of the good news that Ashley talked about is the funding, the CARES Act funding that's available, and we want to encourage you all to visit www.denvergov.org outdoor expansions, and there's there's an entire area there that speaks to you about the eligibility of the program. It is for costs that were incurred from March 16th, 2020 through November 11th, 2020, and it has all of the other details that are there for you. So thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, Nicole. That's a lot of great information. We appreciate it. So next slide, please. Next, we have Scott Go, who is our city's chief building official from the Department of Community Planning and Development. And again, this is in case, you know, if you're going to be doing something more, if you're going to be putting in a tent, if you're going to be building some type of structure, putting in a deck, you know, these type of rules that community planning and development enforces are based on national standards. And I know when you're trying to hurry up and get a lot of this stuff done, sometimes it's worrisome or it might delay you, but they're really important that you follow these. They're to keep you safe and your customers safe and our city safe. So I'll let Scott take it away.
Thanks very much, Ashley. The next slide, please. I'm going to go over those things that'll require a permit and those things that won't require a permit. The simplest way to obtain sort of an enclosure would be through a tent in terms of regulatory process. Any tent, regardless of the size, it doesn't need a building permit if it's going to be there for less than 180 days. But any tent that's over 200 square feet is going to require a fire department operational permit. So there will be a permit required, just not a building permit, because we don't consider tent structures when they're in a temporary nature to be considered a building or a structure. It's a tent. Next slide, please. When you are buying that tent, there are some recommendations. First and foremost is NFPA 701. There's sort of a flame spread rating on the material or the fabric of the tent, and this is something that DFD is going to be looking at. So it's really important that you pay attention to the material of the tent that you're purchasing. Another aspect that's important is the snow load. Some tent manufacturers allow a certain amount of snow accumulation. But if there isn't any snow rating on the tent, it really should not be occupied if it has any snow covering at all on it. And when you're locating the tent sort of in your patio area or where you're going to be putting it, we want to make sure that it doesn't block any doors or means of egress from the restaurant in any way. And I'm sure fire will get into this more, but the fire department connections, that Siamese connection at the front of your building, obviously the tent shouldn't be put directly in front of that. We need our firefighters to be able to go in and access that connection for their hoses. And whenever a tent has more than 49 people, that tent is going to require 2 means of egress, and the path or travel to those egress components should be unimpeded. It should be similar to any other indoor restaurant where you have aisle widths that are required and access to the doors. Next slide, please. So there are other structures that wouldn't require permits either. And simply, if it's under 120 square feet, we really don't need to permit that. And if it's going to be there for less than 120 days. So that's a simple one. When structures are starting to become a structure, not quite a tent, but if it feels more like a tent, it has a pliable or fabric material, and it's 400 square feet or less, and it's open more or less, we're still going to consider that a tent. If it starts to become a structure, not a tent, then that's when it's going to lean more towards a building permit. We're glad to have communication with you if you're uncertain, if you've got a new product, a new idea. Feel free to shoot us emails or give us or a phone call. We're glad to work you through what needs a permit and what doesn't. Next slide, please. So some of the structures that do need a permit that would most likely be coming into us for this situation. So anything that's over 120 square feet. So you're going to be putting this in your restaurant. It's over 120 square feet. It's not a tent. It's a structure. It has to come in for review. Similar to the photograph in this slide, you can see any awning that's secured to a building. We're going to want to double check the structural capability of the wall that's being supported to and the snow loading, because now it's becoming a permanent structure, a part of the building, and we want to make sure that it could withstand the wind, the snow loads of a normal structure. Any raised deck, anything that has structure on it where folks are going to be standing, walking, sitting, those really need to come in for review to make sure that the floor loading is capable of the amount of people that may be on that deck. Fences and barriers, if they're over 5'9" that would need to come in for review as well. We want to double check for how it's going to be secured and make sure it's going to handle any wind loading. Any tent, any structure, anything that's going to be, everything we've been talking about is sort of temporary. Anything that's not temporary, that's going to be there permanently, that's going to need to come in for review as well. So there's a differentiation here. With this program, we're allowing 180 days from a building permitting perspective. I know Dottie has different criteria. I believe it's 90 days, and then you need an extension. For ours, it's most of what we're talking about through operational permits and other, it's 180 days, and then you would get one extension, I believe, is allowed under this program. Next slide, please. Lighting and heating. So if you have heating, the lights that are plugged in or the heaters that are plugged in, they all have to have cords that are directly plugged into an exterior outlet. And those cords have to be rated for exterior use. We don't want sort of cords going in and going indoors and plugging in all these extension cords on the outside. That really creates a tripping hazard and a fire hazard. So that's really important that we're not seeing all these sort of daisy chained extension cords. It's really a recipe for disaster. It's how circuits get overloaded and fire events start. Next slide, please. So propane heaters, this again is going to go into the world of Denver Fire Department, where you're going to be getting operational permits, and Captain Holtz will be talking about that shortly. We certainly don't want any propane heaters under tents, and normally what can happen in terms of propane heaters, what we see most is that you get a propane heating element outside of the tent, and that's blowing hot air into the tent. So the heating element itself is removed from the tent. Next slide, please. Now, when we're connecting to the building utilities, and that means sort of like if you have an electric heater, you have electric lights, you have a gas-fired, natural gas-fired heating unit or units that you want to install, they're going to require a plan review submittal to the building department to make sure that we're not overloading either the panel or the gas piping, to make sure that the size of the piping can handle the amount of load that's required for those heating elements. If you have a generator, that also requires an electric permit, and DFD is going to review that as well. I will say that we're working with some folks, one of the trailer manufacturer, the pre-manufactured trailer units that they're looking at. And there were a couple other folks we're trying to look at maybe having a sort of a master or a pre-approved type unit. They're looking at a temporary power supply. They're looking at having electric heaters in most of the time and having electric lighting out there. And they're actually looking at a temporary new service, similar to something that you'd see at a construction site. It's a very quick process through our permitting and through Excel to get those services set up. And that wouldn't require extensive evaluation or analysis of your electrical system to see if what you're putting in terms of new equipment can be handled by your existing electrical infrastructure. Next slide, please. So when you're coming in to obtain permits, we're trying to make this fast. We know that there's an urgency behind this, and we don't want to lose a month or two in the process. We're trying to do this in a very rapid response, and that's through a 2-day review. So when you're going to our denvergov.org e-permitting site, there's a over-the-counter 2-day review, and that's where you're going to go. We have some helpful guides that'll give you a step-by-step. If you're not familiar with our process, it's really, really easy to go through that guide to better understand how to get through our system. Next slide, please. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. If you're thinking about going to a permanent sort of patio or structure, it would be my recommendation that you go ahead and do what you want to do on a temporary basis, get that permitted quickly, but maybe some of the equipment, some of the infrastructure that you're using, because of the investment, you want to make it a permanent process so that it's not there just for 180 days. And so it's going to take a little bit longer. So get the temporary approval, use it, and then start a new process for a permanent patio in a structure. The reason why it's going to take longer is right now our zoning, because of COVID, we have some leniency through a recent council adoption that some of the zoning criteria is not as stringent because of this emergency situation, as well as our energy codes. We're able to sort of forego some of our energy code requirements. And because of the amount of folks that are in the restaurant, even though you're moving some outside, the overall count of folks that will be frequenting the restaurant won't exceed the capacity that would have been there otherwise. And so the number of toilet fixtures, water closets, and lavatories for your patrons, it's appropriately sized. But if we go back to this and you make this permanent, and now you have a fully occupied restaurant, which had originally designed the right number of toilet fixtures for that interior use, and now you've created a patio, we need to make sure that the right number of fixtures are provided on a permanent basis. So there may be some additional infrastructure that you have to consider when you're doing this. In all instances, for submittals for our group, whenever you have a permit required on a commercial project, which these will be considered commercial, you're going to have an engineer or an architect submit those with a digital signature through our e-permitting process. The next slide, please. And here's just a convenient location for you, depending on if you have an architectural, electrical, or mechanical plumbing or fire question, easy access. As Emily had mentioned, the slide deck will be available for those that would like to see this and have easy access to our contact list. And I think
Great.
that's the end of my part. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Scott. Lots of great information. And again, really appreciate the flexibility that community planning and development has provided during this time. As I said, they're continuing to ensure that they're keeping all of us safe by adhering to our code requirements, but also understanding that in an emergency situation during this pandemic, where they can be more flexible and relax some of those requirements, they really have been doing that. So we really appreciate that. And now we're moving on to the fire department, and same thing here with the fire department. Captain Steve Holtz is going to be presenting. He is the captain of the Fire Prevention Division. And again, you know, as a fire prevention, their standards also line up with all national standards, and they're really important to keep us all safe. But also, this team has just been hustling and moving and working creatively and prioritizing this work. So we've been able to get you guys up and running as quickly as possible. So Captain Holtz, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ashley. Again, yes, Stephen Holtz, Denver Fire, and I just had a pop-up, I think. And we review the majority of the special events that come into the city. Next slide, please. So again, any tent over 200 square feet, any canopy that's going to be over 400 square feet, and any type of temporary heating that you're going to use within the city or your outside venues are going to require a Denver fire permit. Next slide. So just a couple safety concerns we'd have for the tents. So we are going to require fire extinguishers for each tent with a minimum of at least one 2A10BC extinguisher. The larger tents, we're going to require more fire extinguishers, and of course, once you add the heating in on that, we're also going to require additional extinguishers for that. Next slide, please. We're also going to require signage in your in the tent. So we're going to require that you put up exit signs so that they're clearly marked. We're also going to require no smoking signs to make sure that there is no smoking in there. And when you apply for your permit, we're going to ask for a copy of the flame resistance or the NFPA certification for the tents. And usually we're going to require you to submit some type of site plan so that we can get a determination of the exiting from your building and also the exiting from your tent. And we really want to work really hard with you just so that we can make sure that you do have a safe environment for your patrons and for the people that are working for you. Next slide. So some of the no-nos when it comes to tent, there's no heating elements at all within inside the tents. That would be your temporary heaters, mushroom heaters, any cooking, anything that can produce a flame or heat is not allowed under the tent or under a canopy. So when it comes to temporary heat, we do require you to have the blower type heats with the duct work that can actually blow the warm air into the tent and not have the heating element within a minimum of 10 feet from the tent structure itself. Next slide. And that's basically all I have. Again, these are the contact information for different areas within the city. And then the next slide will also have the contact information for my technician as well as myself. So if you have any questions from the Denver Fire Department, feel free to contact either one of us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Captain Holtz. Great job. Great information. Next up, we have Dominic Viana, who's the Deputy Director at Excise and Licenses. And Dominic is, probably most of you have talked to Dominic at one point or another. He's a resident expert on all things related to restaurants and liquor law. But most importantly, if you ever need to get something done, go to Dominic. Dominic really, he's the master of getting this type of stuff done. He's sort of overseeing this project. A lot of times, you know, if you're sometimes in other programs, you might have to go to zoning and then go to fire and then go to the Department of Transportation. Dominic is sort of overseeing bringing all those together, sort of with a one-stop shop where you're just filing one document and then Dominic working to triage that out among the agencies. So Dominic, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And as Ashley indicated, we really are trying to make this as simple as possible. There's You know, each application and each interaction with the city agency is critical for a valid policy reason, be it life, safety, neighborhood input. And what we're trying to do is streamline it. And so that's, you know, kind of the theme of this program. From the excise and license standpoint, we are managing the liquor licenses. We are trying to make sure that we can expand your licensed premise so that, you know, you can serve liquor in these new patios. And like Ashley said, we have about 350 of them running up at this point. And originally it was, the program was authorized into September and then the end of October. Now we're taking a little bit more of a strategic approach on it, trying to give the restaurants certainty and the ability to easily expand. And so you'll be getting different emails from excise and license along the way. We're trying to keep you informed and trying to keep you up to date as much as possible. The first set of emails that you'll see, most of you have probably already received, and those are those extensions. We are going to be extending the relief period for the patios in either 90 or 120-day increments. It'll be 120 days for those that are on private property. If you're expanding into a parking lot, if you're expanding into a space that's immediately adjacent, we will go ahead and say, okay, 120 days. If you're in the right of way, that expansion is only going to be 90 days. And the reason for that is we've got competing needs on those right of way assets, and we need to go through and ensure that, you know, we're not scheduling to tear up the street in the middle of your patio. That's not to say that you won't be able to get your extension in the street during those 90 days, but there's just an additional level of scrutiny, and we'll have to go through and let you know when you can be in there and when you can be out, and just a little bit more coordination. So these expansion requests are designed to give the neighborhood input into your patio. So everybody that's gone through liquor licensing knows that the cardinal tenet is we want to make sure that the needs and desires of the neighborhood are adhered to. And generally, when you're adding a patio, that automatically necessitates a hearing for the neighborhood to come and give their feedback as to if they want that patio, if that patio makes sense for that setting. In this instance, we've sliced through that, and we are going about it a bit of a different way. We are letting you expand your patio, and then we're having you post a notification so that the neighborhood, if there is some sort of issue or question or concern, will be able to reach out to us, and then we'll try to facilitate a resolution. And if it's really needed, we'll go through and do a whole needs and desires hearing on an expedited basis. All of these notices are going to come from the temp expand email at denvergov.org. You'll be getting a PDF with instructions, and really it's fill in the blanks. The blanks being, you know, where it's located, what the address of the establishment is, the name of the established, and the DBA. And then we're going to ask that you take 2 pictures. The first picture is going to be, you know, up close, so we can see that you input the information properly. And the second picture is that you actually posted it in a place that is easily viewable to the public from the street or the entry into your establishment. We haven't seen a lot of hiccups on this. Some of the challenges are that they're going to individuals that might not be in a position to take action. And so if you haven't received those notifications, let us know. Reach out to tempexpand@denvergov.org, and we'll go ahead and fix the contact list. It was the original email address when you submitted your application that we're coordinating with. And so that's critical. Also, it's important, if you're going into the right-of-way, you have to separately update your right-of-way permit. And that's going through the portal that Nicole mentioned when she was giving her presentation. We are not requiring that you get that updated permit and send it back to us. We're going through and we're validating it on the back end so that hopefully the left hand and the right hand are coordinating so that it makes your life a little bit easier and you can go on with the business of, you know, serving people great food and beverage. Next slide, please. Also, right-of-way, or excise and license inspectors are going to be coming out and doing proactive inspections of these patios. We want to make sure that everything is going in line with the expectations of the city to ensure that the patios are safe, to ensure that we don't run into any challenges that could potentially undermine the program with some unforeseen issue or hiccup. And so the excise and license inspectors are going to be coming out, looking at the patios, and they're doing a combined inspection from the various city agencies. We figured having one proactive inspection was enough. We know that you guys probably like us, but you don't like to see our inspectors any more than is necessary. And so in front of you, this is the cheat sheet. This is exactly what our inspectors are going to be looking for. From the CPD perspective, the community planning and development side, we're looking to ensure that there's no structures tied into the building facade. We want to make sure that you don't have some sort of tent that might be tied into a brick facade that, God forbid, the wind picks it up and bricks go flying. We're also going to be looking for unpermitted structures, something that might have been put up, but not necessarily notification to the city. Our goal, again, is making sure that these things are safe. We want to make sure that these things are going to be able to make it through the winter. Looking at the fire side, we're looking for those fire permits. If you have a tent up, if you have some heaters, we want to make sure that they're properly permitted. We are also going to make sure that we've got good access to the fire connector. If something happens, we want the fire department to be able to get in and out as quickly as possible. And looking at that in and out, we're also looking at the egress of the tents. We want to make sure that those egresses are clear, that they're marked, that people can get in and out as necessary. And then some other items that we're looking for are structures in the right of way. If something was put up in a parking lane, we want to make sure that our colleagues over in the Department of Transportation are aware of it. We want to look at the use of space. We want to make sure that it conforms to what we've seen on your diagrams that you've submitted. We're counting the number of chairs. That's an important economic component that we're looking at. And then we're also making sure that you don't have a food or drink station out on these expanded patios. The challenge with the food and drink station out on the expanded patios, obviously there's a public health component, and you'll note that we're not getting public health inspections out on these. Our colleagues there are preoccupied with direct COVID response. And so we want to make sure that everything that is coming into contact with food and beverage has previously been inspected and licensed. Our goal with these inspections is not to play gotcha. Our goal is to make sure that you as a community have the resources, have the knowledge to come into compliance. We want to bring you into compliance. We're not going to, come in overtly heavy-handed. That's not what we're looking for. We're really looking for, to further the partnership that we've developed. Also, there was a question looking at the modification. We've seen a lot of folks that, went out, originally put some patios together, and then wouldn't you know, it was successful, which is great. And then the patios started to get a little bit larger. That's fine. We are on board with that. We just need to know. We want to make sure that if you are getting a little bit more space, that you have rights to the space, that the space is included in your red line for your liquor permit, so that there aren't any issues with control or anything of that nature. If you're putting up tents, that's also okay. You can have your patio and then go through and get the tenting permit or the heater permit at a later time. We're not going to shut you down during that time when you're going through the permitting process. We just ask that you not have your tent up or your heater out until you have that permit available. And I believe that's it from the excise perspective. Next slide. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dominic. So Emily, do you want to go through the Q&A?
Yep. Yeah. Let me take you through some questions. And thanks to the entire city team. I think it's really helpful to see kind of in totality all of the approvals that need to be handled by the different agencies for these different elements. So thank you all for your perspective. I'll take you through a few questions. So the first I think is probably most relevant for Nicole and Dominic. The question came in about submitting an updated or modified site plan before the next extension request is due. So this particular restaurant has an approved permit through January, but might need to modify their plan to include a tent and heater. So can they go ahead and do that before the next extension request?
Actually, they can't do that, but what I recommend that they do, please do not add those elements to the site plan before you have it reviewed and you receive an approval. So if you already have a permit, then you would send an updated site plan to Dottie Permit Operations at denvergov.org. And if you're adding a heater, you would also need to reach out to the Denver Fire Department and get the applicable fire permit. And once you have that, and also note that permit operations, Dottie can't issue the permit until you actually have your fire department permit in hand. And they're turning those around within 24 to 48 hours. So don't be detoured. You just, as Dominic said, we're not here to work against you. We're not being adversarial. We're just keeping you within compliance, which keeps the entire city safe. And so you would be able to do that, but the onus is on you to make sure that you get us that information ahead of time. Please do not install before then. I would reiterate what Dominic shared. We do have a group of individuals, great inspectors that are out and about, and they're ensuring that these places are safe. And if they identify it and it's not listed on your site plan, then it takes us down a different road of compliance. And that's not our intention with this. So again, be very proactive, get a email out to Dottie Permit Operations at denvergov.org, and we'll work with you to make that modification.
Absolutely. And just to echo what Nicole said, you absolutely can operate your patio while you're going through that process of adding an amenity. So if you are, currently through October 31st, you can go ahead and do your liquor expansion while you go through and secure a heater permit and a tent permit and modify your Dottie permit.
Great, thank you both. And back to you again, I think Nicole, this one will fall to you, but there's a question about snow plowing and snow removal, and a concern that a lot of times the plows will actually just move snow from the street onto the sidewalks. And so are there any recommendations about whether it's from the public or the private side of how we might mitigate against that impact to the sidewalks themselves?
That's actually a very viable question, and it's a question that's been on the table within Dottie since the inception of this program and moving into the winter months. I want to just be very frank and honest and say this is where the partnership strengthens. The plows are really a machine, and they're large and they're designed to remove the snow. They were not designed with the intention of being specific to a location. We really do not at this current time have the ability to control where the plow will put the snow, which is why I spent a lot of my presentation imploring to be aware of the weather, to identify when the snow is coming, and to know if the plows are there, that you really need to basically move your items out of, basically out of the right of way. Right now, there's not a way around that. I would defer with my manager that's on the line, Charles Hart, see if he had more to add to it. I know that that's probably not the answer that anyone was looking for, but just being very truthful and respectful of the right of way. There's no way around it right now. There really isn't. Thanks,
Nicole. That's at least helpful that it's been recognized, and we can't solve everything, I guess, with these programs. So that's understood. A question that I think probably goes to Steve and Scott, but we have a question about kind of specifically addressing the bubble or igloo structures. I think we've seen some examples of these both around town and in other markets. Just curious of any specific regulations around those.
So the sort of those bubble or other prefabricated units, if they're a tent, they're going to be going to DFD for operational permit if it's fabric. If it's a structure, not fabric or pliable material, then it'll go for permit. But if it's under 120 square feet, that's easy. We're not involved. DFD might be involved unless you have electric or a service going to that. So that's where we would get involved if you have a service. Otherwise, it might just need an operational permit from Captain Holtz.
We have went out around the city and looked at some of the little igloos that we've seen. Majority of them are so small they wouldn't fall in the requirement for the a permit as far as a tent permit. But we're working now with a couple of locations for heating. I believe the requirement for them from the manufacturers that they need electric heat. So they'll need a permit for that, but we'll also have to work on making sure that they have the proper, the outdoor type of heaters and the heaters that are proper for these things. And then that they also have the power out that's outside of the building, so they won't have to run cords in or out of the building. So we will work with them. If they want to contact us, we will work with them and get those approved, and just so they can have a safe operation.
Great.
Another thing to remember with the those personal dining bubbles or structures, however they look, is that they're considered indoors by the state, with the exception of if you can air them out, and then you can only have one party inside of them, and you have to air them out and have a cleaning between them. And so you could have, for example, a 4-top inside would be fine and appropriate, but not specifically two tops of that nature. So the state has published some really good guidance on that. We'll make sure that's available through our website as well.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one or two more before we turn it over to our design expert that's with us today. I do have a question about the permitting for a more permanent patio or structure to be ready when the virus is gone. So clearly, capacity is not what it will be at hopefully at that time. And so could a restaurant consider, pursuing a permanent approval for an outdoor patio for 25 to 50% of the original capacity, knowing that it could potentially be upgraded once the pandemic is over and that capacity number goes up quite a bit?
Yes, right.
Absolutely. That's something that we've actually heard a lot of. These have been a great stopgap measure, but for some businesses, they've actually found them to be very helpful, and they've had banner months during the summer months. And so the city is committed to, going through and working with those applicants to begin the application phase. Now, what's really important to remember is because this was a temporary solution originally designed to address a critical emergency, we have cut a lot of red tape. It looks like Christmas, but we want to go and work with you to address that. Some of these are completely viable, others maybe not so much. And so there's a process. We're working on putting together guidance so that you can use this time, this next year, to work through that process if that's something that you're interested in looking at. Additionally, we've heard feedback from the community that they might not want the permanent patio, but they really like the summer patio program. And so we're looking at a possibility of expanding that so that we can all have a nice drink on a patio in the summer when 2020 is over.
So restaurateurs, you guys continue to be great neighbors so that if you do want to go permanent, that's what our main rules kick in when, rather than posting for, I think we're having you post 5 days now. If you're going to be doing a permanent patio, you need to post for 10 days and there's a mandatory needs and desires hearing. So I'm sure as you continue to work through and build your relationship with your neighbors, and this is sort of a pilot program for them to see what you can do and you to build their trust and confidence and then move on to permanency.
And from a community planning and development perspective, it is a different permit. It won't be like an extension. It is a more complicated, more robust process. I'd almost recommend it if you're not sure if it can happen, if you engage an architect or if you want to come in and meet with our teams, you're welcome to email me or our architectural structural work group in that email. And we could have a meeting, a Teams meeting. You can say, hey, we're thinking about this. We can bring in zoning and Dottie and everybody, and it might be an easy one that says, oh, you can't, that, you know, you're not going to do it because the zoning won't let you permanently, or maybe it's an easy one and we'll say, yep, we'd recommend going on the path to permanent. So we're glad to meet with you so you don't have a big investment having all this work done and then come in and submit and find out it can't be done. So we're glad to work with folks to help minimize or reduce their risk and exposure on professional services and other things. So we're glad to have preliminary meetings ahead of time.
Thanks. Thank you, Scott. Thanks. Thank you really to the entire team. I know we have a couple more questions for the city team, but we do need to let them go. I hope for our attendees that you'll stay with us till 3:15. We're going to move into a conversation about designing for the spaces we just talked about permitting. But again, I just want to reiterate a thanks to the city team. I mean, this everything that's coming through to me is kind of this you know, partnership, the desire to cut through red tape, the willingness to work with the business community, and we really appreciate that and appreciate your support throughout this, as well as your participation today. So Ashley, if there's anything else you want to conclude with, please do. I do want to reiterate that we'll be sending out that deck so that contact information of the entire team will be included, and any of the questions that didn't get answered today, certainly there can be follow-up with those specifically.
Yeah, and Emily, just to reiterate, thank you to Downtown Denver Partnership for really leading in this area and bringing this idea to us and helping us get organized and get the word out to everybody and holding these events like this. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Scott.
Ashley.
See everyone.
Thank you to the city team. And again, I hope our attendees will hang on. We have a great, I think, shift of gears here to inspire you a little bit about the spaces, again, that we just talked about permitting. We have Mike Griffith from Stantec Urban Places, who will provide not only some inspiration, but I think some real actionable items for you to be thinking about in terms of ways that you can make your guests the most comfortable throughout the colder months. So Mike, I'm going to turn it to you.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started here. Let me know that you can see the screen, please.
It looks great.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, so I'm Mike Griffith. I work with Stantec. I'm a senior project manager and a landscape architect here in Denver, and I work primarily in this outdoor public realm space on urban design projects throughout the city. So I'm very happy to chat about this subject. So we'll kind of get into it real quickly. Safety moment. We're in our houses all the time now. Check your radon levels. That's a really serious illness you can get from radon. So you're inside, make sure your radon levels are where they're supposed to be. And then really kind of getting into this presentation, which is going to be a little bit broad, but we'll cover a couple of different things. Strange times, and anybody that's a fan of the Flaming Lips can probably really kind of relate to this. This is pre-COVID Flaming Lips concert, and this is post. So you could see the significant difference just in this kind of fun example of things that have happened where people are being creative and they're finding things that they can adapt and change. We were talking about igloos earlier, so I thought this was kind of a funny correlation. So one thing I want to really kind of touch on before we get into it, talking about specifically to winter, is understanding that we have overcome a lot of the design challenges associated with COVID and outdoor dining and keeping our businesses operating, even at lower capacities. We're giving them more space. We're figuring places for them to have outdoor seating from around the world. And then this is local. This is in Arvada, so this isn't too far away. A lot of really creative thinking. And I think the best examples that I've seen innovate a couple of specific things. This is an example from our partners at Gale Architects out in Mountain View, California. And they employ this concept of beg, borrow, and aggressive borrow or steal, where basically the elements, the paint is from a leftover project the city was working on. The tables are from a wedding venue that had closed up shop because all the weddings were canceled. And the staff from the different businesses came out to actually help assemble and do the paint. And the city put up money for some of the amenities and the flower pots. And then at the same time, the tenants will maintain some of that stuff. So the relationships are shifting. They're all very fluid, and all the elements are highly mobile. And this is important for seasonality, and we'll get into that for winter. So a key piece to that is sort of understanding that these successful areas took one approach, and that's that you kind of have to provide a little of additional retraining for how people interact with public spaces in the world of COVID. It needs to be sort of relearned. Don't underestimate what you can do with paint. Paint can take chaos into order. As long as people know the rules of engagement, it can have a profound effect on how successful an urban space is. There's no physical barrier that made this happen in this comparison image. Yes, of course, there's always going to be this guy, and we can't prepare for that, in its entirety. We can just hope that most people will realize the value of sort of following the rules, and we can have fun with it. Make public spaces maybe more like a board game, right? So somebody that plays Chutes and Ladders doesn't have to like completely relearn board games to play Sorry. They understand the two because they're very intuitive. And I think we can have public spaces that are specific to brands or specific to retail experiences that are different, but follow the same basic set of rules of continuity and the same science-based approach to keeping people safe. So just a couple examples there. All the examples should be celebrated, but some of them are better than others. This is confusing. There's a bunch of stuff we've seen like this where it's a challenge to understand what we're supposed to do. So what that breaks down to is 4 basic things. We want to have fun interventions that are consistent, that are intuitive, and then why not creative? That's a sticker, so it saves a lot on maintenance in the bathroom. It's kind of gross, but it actually is very effective. And branding also is a big one. So making sure there's opportunities to share branding and messaging, that's something we can never leave out. So we get into some of the discussion about specific winter design ideas. And so there's a winter lens, as we'll call it. And this is basically a design that's in a winter perspective. But something to understand is that if it works in winter, it'd be comfortable in all seasons. So you really want to think about that first and hopefully not as an afterthought. Now we're a little late in the game for that now, but just something to keep in mind. There's a really great document. I provide a bunch of resources at the end here for designing winter design principles for Edmonton. One of my colleagues put this together. So 5 of the main principles is obvious here, right? So block wind, sunshine, color, right? Color, warmth, lighting, and infrastructure really refers to that sort of thermal comfort that can be somewhat of a challenge. And that's specific to winter design, but this is maybe a little more specific to retail and COVID. So these are 3 ways to save small business. I think this is really kind of dialed into what we're talking about here today. And that's basically creating spaces where people want to be, right? People want to get out of the house safely and following state guidelines. And you have to make it easy for them to get there. So that's just, you're not building a road that goes directly to your retail spot, but thinking about how people are getting there and kind of understanding when they might be there, when it might make sense to facilitate their engagement with your business. And the last one is the sticky events. And I want to be careful about events. One of the things that we've learned is that you want to have planned activation, not planned events. Events are specific times and places and crowds, and you open up all sorts of liabilities there. If you have a planned activation, say a fire pit or the tents or the cafe, you're not really telling people to be here at a specific time. You're telling them that we're going to do this throughout a period, and you reduce the likelihood of a crowd being there. So a couple of examples of some of these enclosure pieces we talked about, or I heard the igloos mentioned. We've seen a lot of that. I've also seen, these are straight up greenhouses that you could buy at Home Depot or other manufacturers, and it's a greenhouse and you could set up a table in it. We've seen that a couple places, and then some more interesting ones. I don't know how well that would really work for conversation, but something to keep in mind. We've heard a lot of fire pits. Obviously, the fire pit ideas have been around in the resort towns forever. I think that they're going to become more popular in urban centers as winter rolls in. They become like these social spaces. You're outside. It's a place to get warm, but you obviously can't put that inside of your greenhouse. So things to consider, the trade-offs on both. This is a practice that's been going to be adapted by Arvada and I think Lakewood. That's really popular in Denmark. And this is basically the blankets, at the cafes. They extend their winter cafe season as much as possible. But keep in mind, this is BYOB, so it's bring your own blanket. We obviously, for health reasons, don't think it makes sense to have blankets that are interchanged between people who don't know each other, but just another idea. And then another thing to consider, this is green, we're heading into winter, but when you're thinking of buffers, buffers don't have to be solid walls. In fact, many times solid walls are more susceptible to wind issues. So you need some perforation. We've seen some really good examples in the open streets in New York and in San Diego where they used vegetative buffers more than solid wall buffers. This could be artificial. It could be a number of different things in Denver, but just something to consider. And then there's a couple of things here that I thought was interesting. This is a restaurant in New York. They actually use their scaffolding for some above renovation, and they sort of beg, borrow, steal. They said, look, we're going to go ahead and use that as a roof over our patio space, so you got to get creative. And, some of this stuff, I don't know how attractive some of this stuff can look. You got to have to play around with it a little bit and make sure that the scale makes sense, right? So the scale is a big deal here. And I think that's going to be my last point, is that you want it to be accessible and attractive for people to use these retail spaces and to go to them. We can do that safely, and we can do that and be mindful of the state guidelines and our health, and all the things that we want to do in the winter season can still happen if we follow those guidelines. So that's the end of the presentation, and here's a number of resources to go along with it.
Thanks, Mike. And as I mentioned, we will be sending out this deck as well. So all of these resources, don't feel like you need to copy them down. We'll get these out to all of our attendees today. That was, I think, really helpful, Mike, to see some inspiration of how restaurants can approach designing their spaces, I think, really with all budgets. I think what's nice about what you presented is that you're not saying that there has to be this necessarily massive investment to make this work, but there are things that you can do kind of at the margin to make customers more comfortable, which is fantastic. I am curious, though, if there's kind of a rule of thumb of openness versus heat and comfort. I think that we've had a lot of conversation with this, about this with our restaurant members, of kind of what's the appropriate balance. I'm curious if you have a perspective there of, certainly when you get to a certain point with tenting, you may as well be indoors, right? And so is there kind of any sort of rule of thumb of how you balance those two priorities?
Well, the big thing to keep in mind, and we've seen this question a lot too, because it's like, okay, you've got a fully enclosed space, you might as well just go inside. You can't do that because of the spatial requirements, right? So what we're seeing with some of the restaurant clients that we've talked to is that they're already so restricted inside, they need the outside space. Even if it isn't, even if it's classified as an indoor space outside, it still allows them to put tables together. And if they're getting $20 or $30 a seat, they need as many tables as they possibly can get. And if the weather is going to determine whether or not people actually visit the restaurant, it becomes an interesting balance game. Every business is going to be a little different. I wish I had a rule of thumb in general.
Mm-hmm.
But the things to consider that are really the most important is that Colorado has a very unique climate. We go from very cold to really nice and mild to very cold again, and we do that all throughout the winter. So any of these interventions, if we want to get the most mileage out of them, need to be readily mobile. So we can make adjustments to the point that was made earlier, I believe, by Nicole, for snow removal, for changes in weather, and then, set it back up. We know we're going to have a couple of weeks that are going to be nice, so make sure that you take advantage of that. If it's going to be cold, set it up and kind of plan for it. That's the best answer I can give you on that.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think to your point, I think that's also going to be dependent on that balance is going to be a little bit dependent on the business model of each individual restaurant as well, and kind of weighing those two needs for that particular business. I loved your point about planned activations rather than events. Is that something that you think is a theme that will kind of survive post-COVID? Is that a better way of thinking about activating public and private spaces anyway, or is that something that's very specific, I think that's to the moment?
Well, it's an interesting idea that it's not new just to COVID. I mean, it's something that's happened and been experimented with, where you say, look, we want to activate a space over a length of time, a month or a couple of weeks with the summer or something like that, rather than just have one focused event. And what we find is then there's more of an opportunity for vibrancy and stickiness. So people come back, they build new habits around going to a place instead of just going there once and done for a particular event. So I would hope that it becomes just more adopted, because I think it makes more vibrant spaces overall. People say, we're going to put out a bunch of warming huts, and we're going to do it for the next 3 months. And then people know that's something they can go enjoy for that period of time. And you spread out the load and the volume and the traffic And then all of a sudden the businesses have opportunity to engage with people over a longer period of time instead of just a weekend or something.
Right. That's great. Yeah, it feels more sustainable. I know personally, I'd love to see more fire pits around downtown throughout the city. So hopefully that's something that will stick long past where we are right now. I think we're bumping up against our 3:15 deadline here. So I want to give Mike, thank you so much for being with us and really kind of taking what we heard about kind of permitting and the nuts and bolts of how you actually make these spaces happen to giving us a little bit of inspiration about how we can really make them great. So thank you so much for joining us. And to all of our attendees, we know that winter is going to present some serious challenges and appreciate you being here and kind of working with us to see what we can do to alleviate those challenges as we do head into winter. As I mentioned, we'll circulate the decks, make sure you have access to the information presented today, as well as the contact information of our speakers. And thank you all again for attending today. Take care and enjoy the rest of the day.